Jesus talks about the storms that come into our lives. And he said storms are going to come into your life. The question is, how do you weather those storms? I mean, do those storms wreck you and do they take you out? Or do you get through the storm and you come out on the other side okay? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about this week and next week. 2-part series on how to weather the storms of life. Now, I don't know about you, but and some of you aren't going to like this, but I love watching storms roll in nature, right? I mean, like there's nothing like a good thunderstorm. Now I know the farmers are like, yeah, as long as there's no hail, right? Inch of rain, be great, no hail, right? But even when I was farming, I mean, I would just be awestruck at the thunderstorms. And there's almost like a sense of excitement. I mean, there's always a nervousness, like, I don't want to get hailed out, which we did get that from time to time, but it's just something awe-inspiring about storms, even like blizzards. Like, I know nobody likes blizzards necessarily, but there's just something like isn't there, like when there's supposed to be a big one coming in, and everybody's talking about it, like, kind of don't want to see it, but you kind of do, right? Am I the only one that's like that? No, a few people like that, yeah. So I love storms in nature and see them roll in, but to be honest, I don't really like storms rolling into my life. And I've had storms roll into my life. And sometimes I've weathered them better than others. And you all have had storms in your life. Some of you might be in a storm right now. And the question is, how are you weathering that storm? Like, is it wiping you out? Or that you have to rebuild everything? Or are you standing firm? And Jesus spoke to the storms in our life because he doesn't want the storms that he knows are going to come into your life to wipe you out. And he's actually given you advice on how to not be wiped out by those storms. Jesus teaches us, how can we not be wiped out by the storms of life? And we're going to look at that today, and actually the next 2 weeks, today and next Sunday. And it starts, what kind of got me thinking on this, I was just reading through the Bible, like occasionally I do, and it was in Luke 6, which was a part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Okay, the most detailed account of the Sermon on the Mount comes in Matthew 5, 6, 7. But I just happened to be reading in Luke, and it was actually towards the end of Jesus' sermon. So he'd preached on the Sermon on the Mount, which, by the way, a few of us were there a few years ago when we went to Israel. Sermon on the Mount. It's not really kind of a mount. It's like you got the Sea of Galilee, you got the shore. There's like this gentle, sloping, grassy sort of hill. And people were on the hill, the kind of that shoreline there, and Jesus was out on the Sea of Galilee because you ever notice how sound carries from the water? And it just right there in that certain area, you can really hear really well. And we were actually on that exact spot where they're pretty sure that was the Sermon on the Mount spot. It was just very awe-inspiring, just like, wow, this is where he did this. But anyway, he basically taught. And then at the end, he says this, and this is recorded in Luke 6, starting in verse 46. So he teaches them all this stuff, and then he says this, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." So Jesus is saying there are storms that are going to come into your life, and some of you, depending on what your foundation is built on, or whether you have a foundation or not, some of you are going to weather it well, and some of you aren't. Now, obviously, he's using a metaphor here. He's using things we've all seen in nature. I think you've all seen pictures, at least, hopefully it didn't happen to you, but you've seen pictures of when hurricanes hit, like down in the southeast and stuff. You've seen the devastation that causes, and houses move clear off their foundation and some totally destroyed. You've seen that, and they had that even back then in Jesus' time. So people have seen that, and they know what that looks like. And he's saying, your life can look like that. Doesn't need to, but it can. And he tells us how you can weather the storm. And so we're going to look at that today. But our main overarching point of this whole thing is this, is that with Jesus as my foundation, I can weather the storms of life. You can weather the storms of life if Jesus is your foundation. And I know that's really basic, but that's where we have to start. That Jesus is saying, I have to be the foundation. If anything else is a foundation, it's not really a foundation at all. And a lot of times we build on things we think is a good foundation, like a great career or a great this or great that. And they can be good things, I'm not saying, but all I'm saying is that it's of the world and it may or may not last when storms come. If Jesus is your foundation, it doesn't matter what comes, you can hang in there. And that would make it like a really cool poster on your wall. But like, what does that mean, right? Jesus is my foundation. It's one thing to say it, but how does that work? And one thing Jesus made really clear in this passage in Luke 6 is making Jesus a foundation of my life means to do what he says, not just know what he says. Because if you look back at that passage in Luke 6, here's what he says. Why do you call me Lord? Which Lord means master. It also you could be used as a proper name. Is Yahweh would be the translation of Lord from the Old Testament. But he says, why do you call me Lord, master? Why do you call me your master and you don't do what I say? Right? Because he said, for those who do what I say, not just know, but they actually do it, those people, when the storms come, they weather it. The people who don't do what I say, they don't weather those storms. They get wiped out. And he said the difference is doing what I say. And I kind of added, not just knowing what Jesus said, because a lot of people know what Jesus said. I mean, Satan knows what Jesus said. Right? Lots of atheists know what Jesus said. Lots of people know that. In fact, sometimes they know it better than Christians know it. Right? And in order to do something, we have to know it. But just because you know it doesn't mean you do it. And so we do have to know as Christians. We do have to know what Jesus taught, but that's not enough. You have to actually do it. The biological half-brother of Jesus, James was his name, wrote the book of James. And he says that we're supposed to be not only hearers of the word, but doers of the word. And he's not saying that to be legalistic. You got to do that. And it's not a basis of your salvation. I mean, you can have your foundation wrecked and your whole life a wreck and still go to heaven, right? It's not a salvation issue. It's a life issue. Because salvation isn't just going to heaven. I mean, that's a big part of it. Salvation is like living victoriously here. Right? Sozo was the Greek word. It means well-being and health and all that kind of stuff. And so salvation starts now. And so we should be able to weather those storms. But just knowing what Jesus taught is different than doing what he taught. And he said, if you do what I say, you can weather these storms. And so we want to look at that today. What did he say? Because I got to thinking about that. I was reading through that, and I'm like, wow, okay, so, I mean, I've always known Jesus as our foundation, right? Peter talks about it, and lots of people talk about Jesus being our foundation. It's great. I don't know, I just like digging deeper. Like, what does that mean? Well, then he says, it means if you do what I say, that's the it's not just knowing me, it's doing what I say. That's the real foundation. And so it's like, okay, well, then what did he say? I mean, obviously, Jesus says a lot, right? It's like, where do you start? Where do you even start about what Jesus said? I was thinking, how do you preach that? Because he said, I mean, he's like, you look at all the red letters in your red letter edition of your New Testament. There's a lot there. How many weeks would it, to teach that? And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I learned in Bible college that you're actually supposed to read things in context. Where did he say that if you do what I say, you can weather the storms of life. Okay, he said that at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So maybe it would be good, like, Bible hermeneutics or whatever, to go back and see what the Sermon on the Mount said, because that was at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, right? It would be like saying, like somebody preaching a sermon saying, and so in conclusion, here's the challenge, It's like, okay, what's the challenge? Okay, I just got to know what he said. So I went to Matthew, where the most detailed account of the Sermon on the Mount is. Matthew 5, I started reading on, the Sermon on the Mount. And as I read from a different kind of a vantage point, like knowing, okay, what he's saying here, if I do what he says here, I'm going to weather the storms of life. When storms blow into my life, which they will, it won't take me out. I mean, I don't like storms, but I'd like to come out, whole on the other end, right? And not wiped out. And so I started reading, and I realized there was kind of two sort of different areas that Jesus spoke to. One of them was like our resources. What do we do with our resources? What do we do with our resources? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about next week. This week, because what I saw first, as I first started reading, is how do we handle relationships? And so that's the next point that I want to make here. If you're keeping notes in your bulletin, Jesus tells me what to do regarding relationships. And it's part of that Sermon on the Mount that he ends with, if you do this, you can weather storms. You won't be wrecked. And I don't need to tell you that relationships brew a lot of storms. Right? I mean, think about your own life. Are a lot of the storms that you have either gone through or in right now have to do with relationships? And so Jesus teaches us how to deal with relationships. He teaches us really just clear teaching. Here's how you relate to other people that will not only help you weather storms, it's going to make it so that you don't have a lot of storms, right? You can navigate around them. When I was 18 years old, because I was of legal age, I did not honor my father and mother like I was supposed to, and immediately signed up to take flying lessons against my mom's better judgment. It's like, hey, I've got a big fat job of $4.37 an hour at Three Rivers for the summer. I'm going to spend it all flying. I did. I spent all my money flying all that summer. And so you had to do the ground school, and you learn a lot of your ground school is like learning weather. Why? So you don't fly through a storm. Like, okay, if it's a cloud, I might be able to fly through that. If it's a cloud, I got to know what kind of cloud that is. But if it's the right kind of cloud, or the bad kind, don't fly through that. Like, go around, because you might not get through the other side. And so, if we do what Jesus says, we can navigate around a lot of these storms. We don't have to go right into them. But a lot of us, we don't, because we don't know. We just do what the rest of the world does, and boom, we plow right into the storm, and we get wrecked, and like, well, here we are. And you crash and burn and try and pull yourself back together again and rebuild your life. Maybe. So, would you like to know what Jesus said about relationships? So we're going to learn that today. So, we're going to the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to Matthew, because again, that's the most detailed part of the Sermon on the Mount. It starts in Matthew 5. First one is this. There's 11 here, and it's kind of Rock called it a laundry list, and it kind of is that. It's pretty practical stuff, but I'm going to go through them pretty quickly here. The first one is to show mercy. You hear the terms grace and mercy together quite a bit, but they're related, but they're different. Grace basically is unmerited favor, but grace means I'm getting something good that I don't deserve. Like salvation is because of God's grace. Salvation is good. I don't deserve it, but I'm getting it because of grace, right? So I'm getting something good that I don't deserve. Mercy is not getting something that I do deserve that's like not good, like punishment. Because I and you and the Bible says, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. We've all blown it. We deserve punishment. But if you're robed in Christ's righteousness, you're not getting it. Because Jesus took that punishment for you. So you're not getting punishment. It's like, well, I deserve punishment. Yeah, but you're not getting it. Yeah, but Jesus didn't deserve it. Well, that's true. He's taking it for you. That's mercy. Mercy is when you don't give somebody the punishment they deserve. And so Jesus says this in Matthew 5:7. He says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." That word blessed, you could insert the word happy, and that fits that meaning in there very well. So happy are the merciful, those who show mercy, because they will be shown mercy. What that means is when people do you wrong and deserve like punishment, you're not going to give it to them. I didn't say these would be easy. They're not. The concepts are easy, but living it isn't easy because our society does not like follow most of these. Our society teaches, back at ya. I mean, if somebody does something to you, you bring it back way worse and teach them a lesson. Don't mess around with me. Right? That's what the world says. But Jesus didn't say that. Be merciful. And there's some other things that are kind of related to that too that we'll see as we go along here. But we need to show mercy. In other words, when people do things that deserve punishment, we're not going to punish them. Now, I'm not talking about the government, and people who murder people don't need to go to jail. We're talking interpersonal relationships here, okay? So we're talking about loving your enemies. We're not talking about national defense. We're not talking about nations against nations. We're talking about people. And even more specifically, people within the church, brothers and sisters he even refers to, all right? So we're talking about these interpersonal relationships. Number 2, be a peacemaker. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed," again, happy, "are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." There's a difference between being a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. We're called to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. Peacekeepers are what some counselors refer to as avoiders. All right? They're like, I'm avoiding this conflict because I don't like conflict, and I'm going to keep the peace. And that doesn't make peace. That kind of keeps conflict from happening. But the conflict's already there, so it's already happening. You're just not going there. We actually have a ministry, a peacemaker ministry that Jeremy and Steph Klotfelter lead in our church. They attend in Fairfield, but and some of you have used that. And I think the Mitchells are involved. Are you guys involved in peacekeeper ministry too? And so, because it's important, because we're called to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. But to make the peace, well, we just need to live in peace with each other. And we can do that by being peacemakers. Number 3, let others see Jesus in you. It's like, well, how's that relational? Matthew 5:16, Jesus says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We're supposed to show Jesus to other people. And it says, let your light shine. It's like we're reflecting the glory of God, or His glory of God is showing through us. Not even really reflecting, it's just coming through us. Like we're light in the world. And in this same kind of context, Jesus says, don't put your light under a basket, let it shine. And you're not shining your light in people's eyes, right? People go, oh, turn that down. What are you? Yeah. Like, no, we're just glowing with the Spirit of Christ. And as we glow with the Spirit of Christ, it just lights up things around us. And we're supposed to let people see that, not in a showy way, not in a show-off way, not in a self-righteous way, not in a legalistic way, but we're to show others Christ by letting Him shine through us. And that again, changes our relationships. Number 4, get rid of anger. Jesus says in Matthew 5:22, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister, that means a fellow believer, will be subject to judgment. It's like you are not supposed to be angry with people. Now, I know Jesus had anger, righteous anger, right at the money changers of what they were doing. And I know there's such thing as righteous anger, and I get that. But that's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about, I'm angry with that person because they said this, or I'm angry with that person because they don't get off their duff and help around this church or this whole house or whatever. I'm angry with that person, right? Anger. It's like, you need to get rid of that. Again, we're not talking righteous anger. We're just talking about, I'm just angry with that person. Like, it doesn't, what is it? It doesn't take a rocket surgeon to understand how anger can hurt relationships, right? Number 5, keep your thoughts pure. You're like, well, how's that relational? Well, Jesus tells us, Matthew 5:27. He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay, he said, you heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. Where would we hear that said? In the 10 Commandments, right? But now Jesus is saying, even if you look at someone lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. It's like, whoa, that's kind of legalistic. I mean, like Jesus just lowered the boom on us, right? Kind of feels like that. But he's not saying this out of a legalistic, shake your finger, if you even think it, you're going to hell. He's not saying that. Why is he saying that? Why, if you even think it, you've committed adultery? Because if you're married and you're having impure thoughts about someone you were not married to, that will affect your relationship to the person you are married to. I'm telling you from experience. If you can't, I was under this stupid idea. I'm sorry, I just called other people stupid because you've had the same idea. But anyway, I had this stupid idea. I wasn't stupid, you're not stupid, but this is a stupid idea. Well, I'm not going to cheat on my spouse. I would never cheat on my spouse. We're thinking about physically having sex with someone else. I'd never do that. Yeah, but if you're thinking it, Jesus said it's the same thing. It's like, no, it isn't. I'm sure my spouse wouldn't see it differently. I'm telling you why Jesus said don't do that, because it will negatively impact your relationship with your spouse. And can I just tell you, for those of you married, I don't have to tell you this, there's a lot of storms in marriage. And there's a lot of storms that don't need to be there, that we could navigate around. And one of the reasons there's lots of storms in marriage is because we don't have pure thoughts. And our spouse can never live up to our fantasies. Right? And so when they can't live up to that, then we start treating them like, well, if I was just married to that person, they'd appreciate me. That person with this or that, whatever. And that will really negatively impact a relationship. And if you can lessen the number of storms that come into your marriage, you can lessen a lot of storms, right? And this is one area of that. Again, it's not a legalistic, you can't even think it. It's like, because if you think it, it's going to affect how you treat that other person. Number 6, keep your word. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically Jesus was saying, it's like, you guys, you're always swearing these oaths. Like, oh, I swear by the great God of heaven and his altar there that I will not do this, or I swear by great God's altar in heaven and the angels above that I will do this, and if I don't, I'll smite my head. He said, you guys take all these oaths. How about you just let your yes be yes and your no be no? And that's what he says right here in Matthew 5:37. But let your yes be yes and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. It's like, why do you have to swear, in the name of God, I will do this? Like, that makes it like you have more integrity? You know what I'm saying? How about you just do, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it. And if you promise to not do something, like just don't do that. Hello? I don't have to tell you how not keeping your word will negatively impact relationships. Do I? Yeah. Voice of experience here. I know I'm the only one, but anyway. Called to keep our word. Number 7, don't retaliate. Kind of related to show mercy. Jesus says this in Matthew 5:39, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Again, this is relating to personal retaliation in interpersonal relationships. This is not like dealing with nation against nation or protecting your family. I mean, if I'm walking down the street with my family and or my wife and I see a guy coming towards my wife with a knife, I'm not going to like, here, I'll hold her for you. Yeah. Stabbed her there, now stab her here. Right? I'm not going to do that. I'll practice my kung fu. To practice quickly because I don't know it. Yeah. Maybe some of you are packing heat, right? Some of you are packing right now. Got the concealed carry. Somebody coming at your wife with a knife, let him have it. I don't, that's not what we're talking about here. You understand? This is like when somebody betrays you or somebody says something about you negatively on Facebook and you gotta tell everybody else how much worse they are than you on Facebook. I told you about my love-hate relationship with Facebook, right? I love it because I get to connect with a lot of people and I learn things that are going on, but then I see some of the things people post like, are you kidding me? Oh. I talked to a believer last week who somebody posted something on Facebook and they're going to want to take him to court for libel. It didn't affect business. It was just hurt their feelings. It's like, really? No, you don't. We don't do that. It's like James. I mean, nobody likes that, right? But James and John, the sons of thunder. They go to a village with Jesus and all the disciples, and they're not welcomed. Right? That people treat them poorly. They treat them badly. They put bad things on Facebook about them. And James and John are like, Jesus, should we call down fire from heaven and smoke them? And they're expecting Jesus to go, bring it on, boys. They deserve it. If anybody deserves it, they do. Let's do it. But Jesus didn't do that. He said, we don't smoke people. We don't do that. We're into reconciliation. We're not into retaliation. And so that's what we got to be about. We don't retaliate. Again, we're talking interpersonal relationships. Jesus says this in Matthew 5:44. He says, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Doesn't mean you have to embrace them and be their best buddy, but you do need to pray for them. And enemies, again, we're not talking about like ISIS coming over here to behead you. I mean, we still do want to pray for those guys to get Jesus, right? But we don't need to embrace them. That would probably not be wise. But anyway, so we don't retaliate interpersonally. Number 8, act with humility. Matthew 6:1, Jesus says, watch out, don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose a reward from your Father in heaven. I've seen some people carry this too far. They're like, I've got to do everything in secret. I can't let anybody know what I'm doing, my good deeds, or I'll lose my reward. He's talking about motivations. He's not saying people can't know. He's just saying if your motivation is, hey, look at me. Look at all I'm doing. He said, that's a bad motivation. Don't do that. And I don't have to tell you how that would ruin relationships, right? If you're going around like, look at me, look at all I'm doing, look at how awesome I am, yeah, that doesn't help relationships. And if you are doing that, you can see how that can cause storms to come into your relationship. Number 9, just one word. One big word, forgive. Jesus says in Matthew 6:14, if you forgive those who sin against you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins. Oh man, there's lots of discussion about this. People are like, is he saying that if I have unforgiveness, I'm not going to heaven? Not saying that. My sins, when I've accepted Jesus Christ and I've put on his robe of righteousness, even though I fall short, I'm going to heaven. Okay? My salvation doesn't come and go. Right? He doesn't just, well, you could do that sin, you could tell a little white lie and I won't send you to hell, but that's a big lie. I'm going to send you to hell for that one. That's not how that works. You're robed in his righteousness. Big lie or little lie. So what's this unforgiveness thing? How can you be forgiven? Sin builds up in our life, and it's the agreement, it's the confession. The word confession is in the Bible. And confession, I've taught this before, means agreement. So we have to agree that what we're doing was wrong. Confession means agreement. So if Jesus says you need to forgive people, it's like not forgiving them. Well, you're not agreeing with God, then are you? It's like you have a disagreement with God, which is not I don't recommend that. But you're disagreeing with God, right? He says you need to forgive. I'm not forgiving. I'm not going to do it. Yes, you need to. No. So we're not. But if we're agreeing with him, like, oh, Lord, that was wrong. And I agree with you, that was wrong. So when we confess our sins, we're not telling God something he doesn't know. All we're saying is we're agreeing with, like, Lord, that was wrong. So we agree with him so we don't do that anymore. And how can he forgive something that we're insistent that is not wrong? Or we know it's wrong and we don't care. Either way, it's not good, right? And so why is this whole thing, forgiveness, so important? And we talk about this a lot at Freedom Weekend. Those of you who have been part of Freedom Weekend, you know this, and we've taught this in church, and I don't have time to, it's really a whole sermon on itself, but as a pastor, I've seen more storms and more devastation from unforgiveness than probably anything else. There's probably nothing else that holds a candle to unforgiveness, to seeing wrecked lives. And the reason, read Matthew 18. It tells you why. Basically, it says if you are unwilling to forgive. Now, I know sometimes forgiveness can be a process. Like, I know I need to forgive. That was a tough deal. That was a hard hit. I'm working through it. I know I need to, and I'm getting there. Right? I understand that. God understands that. It's like, no, you don't know what they did. If you knew what they did, you wouldn't ask me to forgive, because you can't forgive that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, that's where the problem is. People think that if they forgive somebody, they're condoning what they did. Forgiveness is not condoning, because what they did probably was terrible. Sometimes the only word to describe it is hideous. And I'm sorry for that. That's terrible. The terrible, terrible things happen. We still need to forgive, which does not mean we condone. Jesus used a word, we translate it into the English word release. We need to release people. Forgiveness is releasing, not condoning, releasing. Forgiveness is also not forgetting. I've talked with a lot of people, and they had an issue with somebody. Somebody hurt them or whatever, and it's like, oh, I forgot about that. I don't even think about it. Well, whether you think about it or not, forgetting is not forgiving. It's just putting a skeleton in a closet and tell nobody to open the door. It's still there. It still stinks, and it will always stink, even though you don't think about it. People have forgotten things so far in the past and never forgive. They're like, what's the stink in my life? It's a rotting corpse you put in a closet and never dealt with. Sorry, but So forgetting is not forgiving. Release. It's like everything that's good in Christianity comes from faith. Salvation comes from faith, right? Jesus said you're healed because of your faith. Forgiveness is a faith issue. Because when we forgive somebody, we're saying, Jesus, I trust you to handle them. I release them to you, God, and you handle that. It's not on my plate anymore. We'll probably never forget it, because forgetting isn't forgiving. We're certainly not condoning it, and God certainly isn't condoning it. But we're trusting Him to handle it. I trust you to handle it. You say, well, what if that person is long time dead? I don't want to get weird on you. I don't know how that works, but Jesus knew what was going to happen a long time before it happened. I don't know how He handles that. All I know is we just got to release it to Him, whether that person's dead or alive, right? That's yours to handle. But we got to do it by faith. But the reason we don't do it is because really what it comes down to is like, Jesus, I don't trust you to handle them because I know you're going to be way too nice to them. Like, I know you're not going to smoke them. And I want them smoked. And since you're not going to do it, I'll do it. Right? Because we say, I'm not going to, if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. And you don't have a hook. Jesus has a hook. But we're into retaliation. He's into reconciliation. And we know the reason we don't want to turn people over to Him, to release them, because like He's too nice. Because how do I know? Because He's too nice to me. Like, thank you for your grace and mercy for me, Lord, but for that person, you can just smoke them anytime now. That'd be good. Right? But so we have to just like release them. And it's a huge trust thing. And for many of you, forgiving certain people or certain person or certain people may be the hardest thing you'll ever do. Maybe even harder than going through what they did to you. Because you just don't understand what it is, what forgiveness is. And I'm getting way off on a whole other sermon, but this is important. Because so many storms in life, you're either in a storm or there's one coming that you're not going to weather because of unforgiveness. And you need to get rid of that. Jesus said so. And if He said to do it, we better be doing it because He knows what He's talking about. Not from a legalistic standpoint, but this is how we live healthily with each other. So forgiveness is a huge one. Number 10, don't label others. Like, is that in the Bible? Well, thanks for asking. Yes, it is. It's just kind of disguised. It's in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, starting in verse 1. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use will be measured to you. Now there's people on both sides of this verse right here. You got the self-righteous Pharisaical Christians who like judging people all the time, right? And then you got the people over here who live in just like however the heck they want to live, and like, don't judge me. You can't judge me. Bible says you can't judge me. Right? So they're on that. But we're called to call sin what it is. All right? You've heard this, well, we hate the sin and love the sinner. Well, that's true. But people on one side, they say, oh, you can't judge me. What they're really hoping to say is, you can't decide what sin is. And you can't just call sin whatever you want to call it. Well, that's true, we can't, but we call it what the Bible calls it. As Christians, we're to call sin, sin. That's sin. But we don't label the person with that sin. And that's what this word judge means. There's like in the Greek, which is original language of the New Testament, there's a whole list of Greek words for the word judge. And this one denotes basically a proclamation that's like a done deal for all time. It's a label. That person's a drunk. That person's a cheater. That lady's a lesbian, that person is a liar, on and on and on. We label that person. We are not to label people. That's making a judgment. And we're saying sentenced, condemned to homosexuality, to alcoholism, to drug abuse, to anger, to whatever those things are, sentenced, condemned for life, don't get out of my face. That's what this word judge means. We're labeling that person. We don't label people. We call sin, sin, but we don't label the person with that sin. I hope that makes sense to somebody. Somebody can be addicted to alcohol. What do they need? They don't need a label from us. They need to get free from that. Is being drunk a sin? Yes. Can we say being drunk is a sin? Yes. Are we judging that person when we say that? No. The Bible is also really clear. Sorry about this, but it's crystal clear. Homosexuality is a sin. Is it a sin? Yes. Are we going to label those people with their sin? I mean, that's a tough, oh man, I just stepped in one there. But you understand, because we're writing people off, is what I'm telling you. When we do that, it's like you can't write, when it's my translation, when it says don't judge, don't write people off as their sin. Because as long as they still got a pulse, Jesus is working to reconcile them. He's working to deliver them from their sin, no matter what it is. Even, gossip, right? Or sowing discord among the brethren, which Christians don't talk about because they're really good at that. Well, that's like the sin in Proverbs that God hates the worst. People say, well, God doesn't classify sins. Well, he kind of does. And one of the worst one is sowing discord among the brethren, chipping about other people. Just saying. But we're not going to label people with that. Is that sin? Yes. Does it need to be dealt with? Yes. But we don't label people with that. Do you understand that? So we're not just going to write people off as drunks and liars and lesbians and cheaters and gossipers. We're not going to write them off. We're going to call sin what it is and then pray for God to deliver them from that, including ourselves, right? Take the speck out of this is where he talks about the log in our eye and trying to take the speck out of somebody else's eye. That's where he's talking about this in the same set of verses there. So we don't label others. Number 11, allow only people with good fruit to influence you. There are a lot of people in your life that are trying to influence you. And Jesus says this, he says, by their fruit you will recognize them. Because he was saying earlier here, he's saying there's going to be people come into your life that aren't teaching good things. It might sound good and they might make it sound appealing to you. He said, but check their fruit. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. You want to speak into my life? You better have fruit to show. When people want to speak into my life, which I need that. I need people to speak into my life. You need people to speak into your life. So you need that, but you need to be careful who you allow to speak into your life. Because if you're allowing people with bad fruit, that looks good, but it's bad fruit, then you're gonna have storms that are already in your life be aggravated, and you're gonna have new storms come into your life that are unnecessarily there. Because you've allowed somebody with bad fruit to speak into your life. And it happens all the time. What's the fruit? Well, the Bible tells us what the fruit is in Galatians 5, 21, 22. Love, patience, peace. If people aren't peaceful and kind and gentle and patient and loving, then why you let them speak into your life? If they don't have that fruit, then don't let them influence you. I'm not saying you can't be nice to them, right? You need to be nice to them, and you can whatever, but you don't let them influence you. Because if you do, again, it's going to bring storms into your life that don't need to be there and aggravate the ones that are already there. Well, we're going to close today. As we close out, the worship team, come on up. If you're willing, I'll have you share what you shared in Fairfield here. You go ahead and come on up. I shared this in Fairfield just as I was closing this morning. I listen to sermons on video or podcasts or whatever, and like the ones I really love are the sermons that are like, oh, I never heard that, or I never thought about that way, and it's like some new way of looking at something, like this aha moment, right? And those are good, right? And I love that. Probably this sermon for you was probably not that. If it was, like, God bless you, right? Thank you, Holy Spirit. This, to me, is like just really practical stuff. I mean, I love like the stuff, the aha moments, but here's stuff like probably what you heard today is probably nothing new. Probably. But the point is, will you do it? Knowing it and doing it is what is the difference between the storms in your life. I think it was, pretty sure it was D.L. Moody, who was, he was a very famous preacher, preaching all around, and a guy that kind of followed him around, was a reporter or whatever, said, when are you going to preach something different? You always preach the same thing. He goes, I'll start preaching something different when you start doing it. Because knowing it and doing it are two different things. And I think Rock had something really good to share this morning, so we'll just let him close, and then we'll close with worship.
Well, it just, for pastors, they want to bring usually a simple message that's profound, something that's we haven't thought about, something new and transforming. And always, like Mike always says, you want to preach a message that's transforming, not just for FYI, right? Something. And so sometimes I think there's a little bit of a reticence or a reluctance to preach the points that Jesus taught. And this is his biggest sermon ever considered in Christianity, the Sermon on the Mount. But yet we somehow resist it because, like Mike says, there's kind of a familiarity. It makes so much sense that it's not new and profound and fresh and revelatory and all those things. And so I just at Fairfield came up and said, I want to come clean. I mean, I haven't read, I've kind of glossed over the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the things really hit me hard today was in my area of my own life. And one of those points just really banged me hard is just because I think this is where we live every day, is the Sermon on the Mount. This is the country we live in, but yet it's so familiar. And I just, boom, hit me out of the side. I thought, I don't struggle with this, but I have been, and it's anger. It's because I've been dealing with a relationship I poured into and put all of my effort and my might into relationship and totally walked on. And I had a hard time dealing with it. I didn't realize, I thought, well, I forgive the person. I'm not struggling with forgiveness. And it's not about retaliating. I don't want to retaliate. But I just realized I'm angry. And it's not something I normally deal with, is anger. I'm kind of laid back kind of a person. And so I just kind of had to repent and really thank God for this message, for one thing, because it kind of blindsided me. And I just want to share also with you that I think this particular sermon is a sermon that every one of you here is dealing with one of these areas in some way, shape, or form today. If you haven't been, you are, or if you aren't now, you have been. But I really feel I'm not out of the guidelines of the Spirit of God by saying I think every one of us here is dealing with one of those points. Something's grabbed you today. And I just had God show me this picture, and I shared this with a person before concerning the situations in their life. God was doing a major change in their life, and they didn't want the transition was coming. And I saw a picture of this person looking up to Jesus with their hands cupped like this. Their hands were cupped. But the person, once God was putting stuff in their hands, they were clasping their hands down like this. And they're holding on to it. And God was saying, I want you to keep your hands cupped. Keep your hands like this. not just with money, but yes, with money, God wants to be able to put into your hands and take out. Put in, bless you with money, take it out. He doesn't put money in so you can just go like this. But also, not just with your situations, jobs, lives, careers, God gives them to you, and then you hold on tight. It's a stewardship thing, but not only that, it's relationships. What Mike is talking about, he wants us to carefully steward those relationships by cupping those people in our hands. Because you can't get crazy with your hands like this. You have to hold them carefully. If you grab onto something, you can swing it all over the place. You can grab onto that person. I got a hold of them now, and I can swing them all over the place because I got a hold of them. But God says, no, keep your hands cupped. Care for them. Hold them gently in your cupped hands. And I feel that's a message for us today, that God wants us to be able to let him put relationships in our hands and we not take control. I'm not going to forgive. I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to retaliate. I'm going to hold on to that. And we just got to be able to just let go. Let God give and let God take away. And I just really feel that that message is far more powerful and profound and transforming than even the preacher who preached it even thought when he brought that message today. So I just want to thank the Lord for that message, and just wanted to share that, hopefully a kind of word of knowledge concerning the hand thing.
We want to have our prayer people come up front here now if you want to make your way forward. And we're going to close with worship. We're closing with a song called Cornerstone. And it's about Jesus being our foundation and the cornerstone. The cornerstone is the first part of the foundation you lay. And you got to get that right. If you don't get the cornerstone right, you're all out of whack. And the foundation, if you didn't catch it, the foundation is Jesus, but it's not just the person of Jesus, it's the teachings of Jesus that we actually do. If we don't follow his teachings and do them, we really don't have a foundation. I hope you get that. I mean, I'm not trying to make this, doesn't mean Christianity, you earn it. You don't earn it. What we're talking about, you're already going to heaven, but are you going to get there in good shape? Or are you going to be so buffeted and your life is such a wreck? Nobody wants to take that route, do you? And so, in order to escape those storms, it's the foundation of Jesus, but his teachings in actually doing them. So, if, like Rock said, if you struggle with any of those areas or anything else you need prayer for, our prayer people are up front here, or they will be in about 16 seconds, and you can come up as we close, and they'll pray with you.